Masechet Kiddushin Daf Chaf. We'll begin with the Braita regarding someone who makes a condition when he sells his daughter. Tanya idach. המוכרת ביתו פסק על מנת שלא יעד, נתקיים התנאי דברי רבי מאיר. החכמים אומרים אם רצה לייעד מייעד, מפני שהתנה על מה שכתוב בתורה, וכל המתנה על מה שכתוב בתורה, תנאו בטל. A father sells his daughter, and he stipulates that I'm selling it to you on condition that you cannot do yi'od. The father is telling the owner, you can own her as a slave, right, until it's time for her to go free, but you won't be able to do yi'od and marry her. According to the Bimeir, the condition works, and she is a slave, and the owner cannot marry her. Hachamim, however, say that she is a slave and the condition is invalid. So that if the owner decides he wants to designate her and marry her, he can. Because there's a general principle that anyone who makes a condition against the Torah, the condition is invalid. And therefore, this is a condition the Torah says, if the owner wants to marry her, he can, he has that right. And so you cannot make a condition against the Torah according to Chachamim. Now we ask, Ul Rabbi Meir Tanao Kayam, Vatanya Omer Li Sharet Mikudeshet Li Amenat She'en Lach Alai She'er Kesut Ve'ona, Hareza Mikudeshet Utenao Batel, Dibre Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Bedabar Shebebamon Tanao Kayam. Hold on, Rabbi Meir seems to contradict himself, because in the following Baraita, a case not of slavery, but a regular groom and bride, and he says, you are betrothed unto me on condition that I do not have to provide for you anything, not food, not clothing, and not conjugal rights. In that case, the Kiddushin works, even though the condition is invalid, right? The condition falls away, null and void, and the Kiddushin goes through, and that groom will have to provide all those things according to the Bimeir. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says, if it's something that has to do with money, so anytime, you owe me money, I can always forego my right to money. So the wife, she can forego her rights and say, it's okay, I don't mind if you don't give me food and give me clothing or shelter, it's okay. So she can agree to it, and the Kiddushin works, and the groom does not have to fulfill the biblical obligations. So let's focus on Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir in the first Baraita says that if he makes a condition against the Torah regarding Yi'od, the condition is valid, and the owner cannot do Yi'od. But over here, if the groom makes a condition against the Torah, the condition is invalid. So how do we reconcile this? Amar Chizkiya Shaneacha Tamar Kera Le'ama Pamim She'eno Mochra Ela Le'ama Bilbad. The pasuk says if a man sells his daughter as a maidservant, Le'ama. So the focus on that word means there can be instances, even in the Torah, that a father can sell his daughter only for an ama, even without potential to be a wife. So therefore, it's not a condition against the Torah. If it was totally against the Torah, like this one, regarding Sher Kesut on Onad, Bimir would say the condition is void. But here, the Torah hints that there is a possibility of selling off a daughter as only an Amma, so it's not a condition against the Torah, and that's why it's valid. V'Rabbanan, Abdile. Now the other rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Meir, and they say that this is against the Torah, so obviously they're using this word Amma for something else. What will they learn from it? The word Lama teaches that a father can sell off his daughter even to someone that she would be pasul to marry. Like, let's say he's a mamzer, so that marriage is not permitted. If they would do a kiddushin ceremony, they would be mikudeshet, because it's only a lav, not karet, not like arayot. So even though it's pasul, it's permitted because the father says, I'm selling her just as an amma. And even though there will be a prohibition to do yi'ud and marry her, but still is a possibility that theoretically you could do yi'ud and kiddushin, and it would be a valid marriage, although a prohibited marriage. So the word la'ama comes to include and say that a father can marry off his daughter even to someone she is not allowed to marry as a pesul. Now, within this Braita, we continue and say, "V'alo dinhu im mekadesha lifsulim lo im kerana lifsulim mal mekadesha lifsulim sheken adam mekadesh et bito k'shin na'ara im kerana lifsulim she'en ma'adam mocher et bito l'chshin na'ara tamod omar le'ama melamed shemochra lifsulin." The Braita asks, why do you need the word ama to teach me that a father can marry off his daughter to, let's say, a mamzer? We could figure it out from a kal vachomer, and we don't need that extra word le'ama to teach us that. What's the kal vachomer? If a person can do Kiddushin with someone pasul, you're not allowed to do it, but the Kiddushin is valid, so all the more so to sell her off. In other words, we presume that selling a daughter off, which is 2 steps away from Kiddushin, right? She's going to be a servant until such time as maybe that will lead to Kiddushin if there is Yehud. So if Kiddushin is valid, then all the more so selling to someone who, if you marry them, it would be pasul, certainly that would be valid. So why do we need the word ama? So we destroy the kal vachomer because we say it's not comparable. For Kiddushin, a person can marry off his daughter, be mekadesher, even when she's a ne'ara. But you can't compare that to selling off a daughter, because a father cannot sell off a daughter when she's a ne'ara, when she's past 12, only when she is a ketana. So you see from here that the power to sell off a daughter, the power to marry off a daughter is greater than the power to sell off a daughter. Therefore, just because you can marry off a daughter to someone pasul does not necessarily mean that you can sell off a daughter to someone who's pasul. So the kal vachomer is broken. The kal ends up being chamur, and what we thought was chamur is really kal. So that's why we need the pasuk to teach me. So that's the word. The word ama teaches that you can marry someone off, marry a daughter off to someone who she is not permitted to marry, because that person is pasul. So now we have Rabbi Meir. He learned that from the word ama that you can make a condition and say no yi'ud, and she's just going to be a maidservant with no possibility of marriage. That's Rabbi Meir. And Abanan learned from this that you can sell off a daughter to a pasul. Now the Braita continues and gives us another opinion. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, im lelamed shemochra lifsulin, hare kivan ne'amar, im ra'a be'anei adonea, shera'a bin nisuea. Rabbi Eliezer says, I agree with your law, the law of Rabbanan, that a father can marry off a daughter to a pasul, but I know that from a different pasuk, right? If it's teaching pasulim, I already know that. The pasuk says, if it's bad in the eyes of the owner to marry her. Well, why is it bad in the eyes of the owner? Simple pashat is, I don't know, he doesn't like her, so he doesn't have to. But this Rasha says that it's bad legally. There's a legal problem for him to marry, right? There's some problem of mamzerut or kohen to a divorcee, or kohen gadol to almana, and so that's why it's something negative about this marriage. Nevertheless, the sale was good. Just the owner says, I don't want to go through viyud because there's a prohibition. So I already know that a sale is good in regarding pesulim. So if I know pesulim already from that, so then matamud omar le'ama, what am I going to do with the word ama? Melamed shemochra likrovim. According to Rabbi Eliezer, big chidush. The father can even marry off his daughter to a close relative. For example, his son, her sister. And even though that son obviously will not be able to do yi'ud, marry his sister, nevertheless, according to the Rabbi Eliezer, he can sell her off as a slave while she's a ketana to her own brother. And that's what Rabbi Eliezer learns from Ama. Now we continue. The Braita asks, wait a second, I could derive that from a kal vachomer. Isn't it the same thing? If you can a father can sell off a daughter to someone that she is pasul to marry by a lav, then can he also sell her off to someone that is a karov? That will be isur karet. Either one, both are a prohibition. So what's the difference? If one's allowed, the other's allowed. And if you learn the first one from imra'ah, why not learn both of them from imra'ah and compare them? So it's not so much a kal v'chomer, it's more like, these would be equal. But then we refute it. Obviously, it's really not comparable at all. If you're allowed to sell the daughter to a pasul, where if you did yi'ud, it would be valid. Even though it violates a prohibition, it would be a valid marriage. So can we learn from that to a close relative that even if you did yi'ud, it would not be valid because it's an isur karet, like a brother and sister. So this comparison is no good. That's why I need so according to the Eliezer, he learns from the word ama that you can even sell a daughter to kirovim. Now we ask, what about Rabbi Meir? He used the word ama to teach me that you can make a designation that I'm selling you my daughter, but you can't do yi'ud. Since he used ama already for that, how will he learn the law that a father can marry off his daughter even to pesulin? He could use the pasuk that Rabbi Eliezer used, imra'ah b'nei adoneha, if the owner does not want to do yi'ud because it's a prohibition of a psul. So see, Rabbi Eliezer is useful because he already introduced that pasuk. So you know what, Rabbi Meir can use it also because he agrees with that law. And now, what about kirovim? Rabbi Eliezer used the word ama to teach me that a father can marry off his daughter to kirovim. So where's Rabbi Meir going to learn that law? The answer is he doesn't have to learn that law because he doesn't agree with it. Regarding kirovim, he agrees with Rabbanan that a father cannot marry off his daughter to kirovim. And therefore, everybody can account for all the pesukim. Rabbi Eliezer uses imra'ah for pesulim and ama for kirobim. The Rabbanan just look at ama and they use that for pesulim. Rabbi Meir uses imra'ah be'aneh for pesulim, and he uses ama to teach me that a father can make a stipulation not to do yi'ud. All right, still now on the subject of kirobim, we learn a very important halacha, a very interesting exception. Taneh hada mochra labi and mochra libno, v'tanya idach and mochra lo labi v'lo libno. We have two baraytot that say different things. The first one says that a father can marry off his daughter to his father. That would be the girl's grandfather, but he may not marry off his daughter to his son. That would be the girl's brother. So we have to figure out, what's the difference between those? The second Baraita is clearer. That says a father cannot marry off his daughter, not to his father and not to his son. In other words, not to the girl's grandfather or to her brother. So let's analyze. The second Baraita that says it's prohibited across the board, that follows Rabbanan, who say marriage to selling off a daughter to kirovim is not permitted. So that's consistent. But the first Baraita that says that he can marry off his daughter, yes, to his father, but not to his son. Who is that like? It can't be Rabbanan, because Rabbanan would say not to the father either. It can't be to the Eliezer, because he says all kirovim are allowed, even the son would be allowed. So why are we splitting the difference? And the answer is Le'olam ki Rabbanan, modu Rabbanan hechadika sad yaud. Actually, Rabbanan would agree, can agree, and according to this Baraita, they do agree that he can marry off his daughter to his father because there is a possibility of yi'ud. What would be that possibility? Well, if the father marries his daughter off to his father, that's the grandfather. So the grandfather is the owner. He cannot do yi'ud because that's prohibited to be with his granddaughter. However, in the law of yi'ud says even if the owner doesn't want to do yi'ud himself, he can marry off his son to the maidservant, and that is permitted. Not the son who's the father, but rather a different son who would be the uncle of the girl. Uncle marriage is permitted. The rabbis even encourage it. And therefore, since there is a possibility that this father is going to sell off his daughter to the grandfather can do yi'ud for his son. He can arrange his son to do yi'ud with the girl. So since it has a possibility of doing yi'ud in a totally permitted way, therefore even Rabbanan would agree that this is permitted. Next baraita, teno Rabbanan, im begapo yabo, begapo yeseh, begufo nichnas, begufo yeseh. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer yichidi nichnas, yichidi yeseh. So the pasuk says regarding an eved ivri, it uses an unusual word, im begapo, right? If he comes into the slavery himself, he leaves also himself. What does this mean? The first opinion says begufo, his body. He comes in with a full body, all his limbs. He leaves with all his limbs with a full body. We'll see what that means. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says if he comes in single, not married, then he leaves single, right, without any wife, for example, that the owner would give him while he was a slave. Now, let's analyze. What does Tanakama mean by that he comes in with his full body and he leaves with his full body? This teaches, Rava explains that an Eved Ivri does not go free if the owner hurts one of his limbs, injures one of his limbs. For example, his eye. If an Eved Kana'ani, if an owner knocks out his eye, then the Eved Kana'ani goes free. He doesn't get any payment, but he does gain his freedom. However, for an Eved Ivri, he doesn't go free. Instead, the owner has to pay, right? Just like two free people, if I knock out your eye, I have to pay for it. So too here, he has to pay. So what does this mean? Begufo. As he came in with his eyes and his limbs all intact. So if the owner should cause him an injury, he pays for it. Once he pays for it, he's making him whole again. I mean, I'm sure most people would rather have their eyesight than have whatever monetary sum. But nevertheless, that's the restitution. That's making him whole again. So he leaves. He comes in with all his limbs. He leaves with either all his limbs or payment for all his limbs, but he only leaves at the end. He doesn't leave because he lost an eye. He leaves only at the end of his service. So that's what Tanakama learns from this. Abaye says, I already know that from another pasuk that an Eved Ivri does not leave like an Eved Kanani leaves. They have different laws. Eved Kanani leaves with injury to a limb. Eved Ivri does not leave with injury to a limb. So I don't need this pasuk in Begafot to teach me that. Rava answers, no, if I only had that pasuk, I might think that the Eved Ivri, not only do you have to pay him, but he also goes free. In other words, the Eved Kanani goes free if you knock out his eye and there's no payment. Not so Eved Ivri, he goes free and there's payment. I might have thought that his going free is different from the going free of the others. They both go free, but one with payment and one without. So that's why I need this, begufo nichnas, begufo yeseh, that he comes in full and he leaves full, meaning he leaves after the payment. It doesn't leave because of the injury. Because of the injury, I have to make him full. That's all I have to do. I only have to pay him, and he doesn't go free. He will go free full when the term of service is done, and not because of the injury. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer yichidi nichnas yichidi yeseh. He says no. If he comes in single, he leaves single. What does that mean? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Achi Kamar Yesh lo isha banim Rabo moseh lo shivcha Kanaanit En lo isha banim En Rabo moseh lo shivcha Kanaanit. It means as follows: if he has a wife and children back at home before he was sold into slavery, then when he's a slave, his master can give him a non-Jewish slave to be with, to have children for him. So and then when he leaves, that wife and children, the Shivcha Kanaanit, not really a wife, there's no marriage there. She and those children that he has with her remain with the owner. That's his property. That's his working at night. As we saw earlier, he works in the day out in the field, and at night he has children for the master. So, and then he'll go free and go back to his wife. However, if he comes in single to the marriage, then the master is not permitted to give him a shifcha kana'anit to sleep with when he's there. Now this seems unusual. It seems like it should be the other way around, right? If he's married, then he shouldn't be with any other woman. If he's not married, well then, let him be with another woman. But the commentaries explain that if he's single, then we worry that now he's a slave and he's with this shifcha kana'anit, he's going to end up liking her, and then he's going to want to remain an eved and be nirsa because he wants to be with her. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want people to remain slaves and remain with this shifcha kana'anit. So that's why the owner cannot give him a shifcha kana'anit in the first place if he's single, so he doesn't stay with her. If he's already married and he has a wife and kids at home, then we're not worried about that. He loves his wife and his kids. He's going to want to go back to them. Then it's okay to give him a shifcha kana'anit in the meantime to have children with. He's not going to downgrade from a wife to a shifcha kana'anit. That will be temporary. When the service is up, he'll say goodbye and he'll go back to his wife and family. Next, Tenor Banan. Nimkar b'maneh v'ishbiach ve'amad al 200, minayin she'en mechashevin lo el hamaneh, she'nemar mikesef miknato. Very interesting case. A slave is sold for 100 dinar. That's his initial value, 100 dinar for the 6 years. In the meantime, he worked out, he got stronger, he learned more skills, and now he's worth 200 for 6 years. Now, someone wants to redeem him in the middle, or he wants to redeem himself. Normally, let's say it's right in the middle after 3 years. Normally you have to pay 50 because he was worth 100, so now you pay half. But now he became worth more. So do we say that now you have to pay half of the 200? How do you know that you still only pay half of the 100? Because it says mikesef miknato. Here's the pasuk right here. Im od rabot bashanim. You go from the original sale price and you ignore the fact that it became more money in between. Now, what about the opposite case? Let's say he was sold originally for 200, but now he became sick and weak, and now he's worth only 100. How do you know you used the lower price? And if he wants to redeem himself in the middle, he can pay half of 100, not half of 200. Tamodomar kefi shanav. And that's the next pasuk. It says ime'at, and so on. Kefi shanav, you go according to the years. And according to the years means whatever he's worth in that year, and you update the price. In other words, we always do it for the benefit of the slave going free, even though it's to the detriment of the master. אין לי אלא עבד הנמכר לנוכרי, הואיל וניגע בקרובים, ידו על התחתונה, נמכר לישראל מנהלן. The context over there was a Jew who sold to a nochri, and in that case, yeah, we want to get him out of slavery because he's under a non-Jew. And there, it's the relatives that are redeeming him. They're redeeming him so he can go free. So there, it makes sense that Torah will want to make sure that he is not under the hand of a non-Jew. And might learn, idolatry or whatever bad things there, and he's going to go free. So yeah, we want to encourage that, and that's why the owner is at a disadvantage. But what if it's Eved Nivri that's owned by a Jew? How do you know that the same law would apply? And the answer is a Gezerah Shavat that we had made earlier. Sachir, it says regarding a Eved Nivri owned by a Jew and the Eved Nivri owned by a non-Jew, and so we learn that it's true for both of them. Amar Abaye, Hareni keben azai. Fantastic phrase. Abaye one day woke up feeling very confident, very good. His mind was totally sharp. He says, I feel like Ben Azai in the marketplace of Tiberia. Ben Azai was able to answer any question that anybody had, not just in the Bet Midrash where it was specific questions and he can relax and concentrate. Even in the middle of the shuk with everything going on and distractions and all kinds of people from all walks of life, he said, ask me anything and I can answer it. Abaye says, I feel confident today. I'm up for a challenge. Amar le'ahu mirabanan Abaye, mikliha nekera'i ka lemidreshinu lekula ve'ika lemidreshinu lechomra. My chazita derashinu lekula, nidreshinu lechomra. So it's a good question. He says, you brought these two pesukim just now. One of them you interpret for leniency. You can interpret them both for leniency. You can interpret them for stringency. Why did you decide to interpret them for leniency? Why not interpret them for stringency? In other words, we said that kesef miknato, we're going to go by the original sale price if that's lower, and kefi shanav, we're going to go by the current sale price if that's lower. So you're picking whichever one's lower, but you can switch it around and you can say, I'm going to do whatever is higher. If he goes down in price, I'm going to do the original sale price, which is higher. If he goes up in price, then I'm going to do the current sale price, which is higher. So maybe you could say that we're going to make it machmir for the redemption, for the benefit of the owner. And right, what's the difference? So that's a pretty good question. We're actually going to see two answers to it. Abaye is going to give the first answer. He says, La salka da'atech midakil rachamana legabe detanya ki tob lo imach v'mecha b'machal v'mecha b'mishteh. Abaye answers, he says, no, that don't think that. Look how rachamana Hashem is de'akil rachamana legabe. Hashem is lenient. Hashem says you have to be treat the slave nicely, so we have to be lenient to him. As the pasuk says, Kitob lo imach, that the Eved Ivri should be well with you when he's living with you. That means he's with you in food, with you in drink. שלא תהיה אתה אוכל פת נקייה והוא אוכל פת קיבר. אתה שותה יין ישן והוא שותה יין חדש. אתה ישן על גבי מוחים והוא ישן על גבי תבן. מכאן אמרו כל הקונה עבד עברי כקונה אדון לעצמו. You shouldn't have a situation where you're eating fine bread and the slave, you give him whole wheat bread. Well, nowadays we like whole wheat, but back then, like the bran, coarse bread. You're drinking fine old wine and you're giving him grape juice. You're sleeping on nice, comfortable sheets and the slave is sleeping on straw. No, whatever is your level of lifestyle, you have to give that to the slave also. Because of that, we learned that anyone who acquires an Eved Ivri is acquiring a master for himself, because that's the owner that actually has to go and make sure the slave, are you comfortable? Do you have what to eat? Do you have what to drink? Ends up the owner is serving the slave. So therefore, since the Torah says you have to treat an Eved Ivri nicely, and right, that's for the benefit of Eved Ivri and detriment of the owner, so too when it comes to redemption, and the price goes up and down, we're always going to look for the benefit of the slave going free, even if it's to the detriment of the owner. Okay, pretty good answer to respond to right on the spot of a random questioner. But the questioner continues, wait a second, maybe only regarding food and drink, it makes sense you have to treat the Eved Ivri nicely, that he should not cause him suffering. But in terms of redemption, maybe we should be stringent on him. After all, let's say he stole whatever he did to become an Eved Ivri, so he did a crime. Kind of like today, if someone does a crime, they go to jail. They're going to go to jail for 20 years. While they're in jail, do we have to make them suffer and torture them? Generally, we don't, right? If he has a certain diet, we try to provide for inmates, whatever diet they need. We give them medical care and so on. The punishment is that they're in jail. They're out of society. They're not a danger, and they're going to serve their years. So we can give them a dessert, right? And, good tasting food. That's okay. But we're not going to be lenient and say, I want to be nice to you and we're going to let you out 5 years earlier. No, one has nothing to do with the other. And so it could be that the Torah only says you have to treat it Eved Ivri nicely and he shouldn't suffer while he's a slave. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he should get the lower price to redeem himself, because then you're cheating the owner. Maybe, who says you should do that? And now we're going to prove that we have a long Agadah. This long Agadah is going to prove that someone who is sold into slavery is because he sinned, and we're very strict upon him. That's going to be the point. So this whole Agadah is part of this question that maybe we should actually be strict regarding the Eved Ivri and not allow him to be redeemed for the cheaper price. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina Omer, Bore kama kashe abka shel Shevi'it. Come see how harsh is even the dust of Shevi'it. Shevi'it, of course, you're not allowed to work the land. You're not even allowed to buy and sell produce that grew in the land. And if someone does, then the punishment is great. The following Rasha will be the sequence of laws that are in Vayikra 25. It starts off talking about Shivi'it, and then it talks about other laws of a person is poor and he has to sell off the various things. So we learn as follows: Adam noseh v'noten beperot shvi'it lesov mocheret metaltelav shenemar b'shnat hayovel tashubu ish al achuzato smichle ki tvichitim timkeru mimkad lamitecha o kana miyad amitecha davar nenikne miyad liyad. If a person will buy and sell fruits of Shavuot, and then he's going to have to sell his movable property. That's not so as bad as moving as selling land, but this is only the first step. So he's going to have to sell his movable property. We see this because there are two Pesukim back to back. One says if everybody will return to their land, and right after that, if you sell land, if you sell something to your friend or buy something from the hand of your friend. From this phrase, miyad, we learn that this is talking about movable property. This is not the Pashat of the Pesukim, but this is the Derasha. So something that can be acquired by passing hand to hand is not land, but rather something movable. So you're going to end up having to sell, you're going to go into debt. You think it's midah keneged midah. You think you're making a buck because you're going to take this property, this fruit that's supposed to be free, and you're going to make business out of it and sell and make a profit. Any little profit that you're going to make, you're going to end up having to be is going to be worse, and you're going to be in debt, and you're going to have to start selling off your furniture. If the person doesn't realize that he's being punished for his sin and make teshubah, then the punishment will get worse, and he'll have to sell off his field. As it says a few Pesukim later, if a person is poor and sells off his ancestral land. If he doesn't get a chance to do teshubah because he still doesn't get the point, then he's going to have to sell his house. As the pasuk later on says, if a person should sell his dwelling house in a walled city. Now we interrupt the Braita to wonder about the different phrases, lo hirgish and lo bat liyado. How come the first time it says he didn't sense that he's getting punished, and the second time it says repentance did not come to him? כדרבונה, תאמר רבונה, כיוון שעבר אדם עבירה ושנה בה, הותרה לו סקל דעתך, אלא נעשית לו כהיתר. As Rabuna says, when a person sins and then sins again, it becomes permitted. Doesn't that mean it really becomes permitted? Once you sin twice, then you're allowed to, right? If I eat a cheeseburger twice, then it becomes permitted. No, it means it becomes like it's permitted in his mind. The first time a person goes and eats a cheeseburger, he still feels guilty about it. But then he goes again and again, and he gets used to it, and then he doesn't even think about the prohibition anymore. So that explains the transition. Lo Gish is he's still somewhat. He still feels somewhat guilty. He's just not sensitive enough that is going to make him make teshubah. And then he continues sinning, so then lo bat liyado, it's not even in his hands to make teshubah. It's like completely out of his mind. So the more one sins, the more one goes down the rabbit hole, and it becomes harder and harder to come out of it. Okay, back to the Baraita. Lo bat liyado ad shemocheret bito shenemar v'chim kod et ish et bito le'ama. Now, if he still doesn't get the point, then he's going to lose more money and will have to sell off his daughter. As it says, if a father sells off his daughter as a maidservant. Now, this pasuk is from Shemot and not from Vayikra, that in the previous series. So we wonder about that. Ve'af al-gav, debito lo ketiba b'hai inyana, ha'ikera mashmalan, izben inash berate ve'la nezef beribita. Mai ta'ama berate migre'a ve'nafka, ve'ha mosfa ve'azla. Even though the selling off the daughter is not written in this chapter in Vayikra 25, but nevertheless, we can learn an important principle from the order in the Braita, because the next thing in the Braita is going to be borrowing with interest. And it teaches us that's better to sell off your daughter as a slave and not borrow with interest. Why? Because if one has to sell off his daughter, although that's a terrible thing, but eventually the daughter will work off the debt, and it will become cheaper and cheaper to redeem her until eventually she will go free. So that's a kind of way of getting emergency money in such a way that the amount that one will have to pay will get lower and lower. That's because she's working during that time to pay off that debt. Whereas if I borrow with interest, then the more time goes by, the more I have to pay back. And so it just gets bigger and bigger, and a person gets into more debt, which, we see unfortunately happen, a bad debt, credit card debt, and then it becomes impossible to get out of. So that's how bad. It's not saying that it's not a big deal to sell one's daughter. It's a very big deal. But even worse is borrowing with interest. Try to pay off your credit cards. Okay, lo bat liyado ad shelava beribit, shenemar v'chi yamuch achicha, if he still didn't get the point and make teshuvah, so then he's going to have to borrow with interest. As it says back to Vayikra, if your brother is very poor and his means fail with you, and then right after that it says, do not take interest from him. So it means that, well, you're not allowed to take interest, but he's going to be in such a dire strait that he's only going to be able to find a loan with interest. And even that doesn't cover his expenses, because he has even more losses. Then he's going to end up selling himself into slavery, which is the next law. Lo lecha ela leger, shene'emad leger. Not only will he have to sell himself to another Jew, he'll have to sell himself to a ger. What kind of ger? Lo leger zedek ela leger toshav, shene'emad ger toshav. Not just to a convert who converts to Judaism, but even to someone, a non-Jew, who lives in the land of Israel. He'll have to send himself to them. And if that still not, he doesn't get the point, mishpachat ger ze nochri. To the next words are a family of a ger. Family of a ger are totally non-Jews. Keshehu, not even ger tzedek, not even ger toshav. Keshehu omer le'eker zenim kala avodah zara atzma. And the word eker that appears there, that refers to idol worship itself. Now, they still don't get the point. After he's sold to a non-Jew, he'll have to sell himself to an idolatrous temple and actually work for idolatry. So that will be, totally the lowest of the low that he will descend into, because he's not getting the point to make teshuvah. So all that, the point of that whole derasha is that someone who sins, in this case, is to sell shvi'it, fruit, or in our case, if he steals or whatever he did to get sold in the first place, we really throw the book at him, right? And so he really deserves to have that full punishment, just like this guy who goes all the way down till he's sold into slavery, and that's because of his sin. So too, the person who steals and is sold into slavery, we should be nice to him in terms of food and drink. He doesn't have to suffer while he's a slave, but we should not be lenient on the redemption, because he deserves what he got. He deserves his punishment. So what do you say about that? Abaye answers, Amaleh, Hatama Adre Kera, Tetana Deber Bishmael Ho'il V'halach Ze V'na'asa Kumar, Lavoda Zara, Ema Litche Ben Achar Nofel, Tamadomar Achare Nimkar Geula Tiye Lo, Echad Me'echa V'Yigalenu. Abaye says, keep reading, don't stop there, right? Even in that case of this guy who keeps not making teshubah, the Torah brings him back, as we see in the Braita from the school of Rabbi Ishmael. Since once this person goes and he becomes like a priest to idolatry, he's forced into it. So we might think, let's throw a stone after the fallen one, right? Let's kick him while he's down. Look how degraded he became. Maybe we should forget about him and abandon him. But the Torah says, no. After he's sold, still redemption should come to him. One of his brothers shall redeem him. In other words, don't give up on people. This is such an important lesson. What a beautiful agadah. Even if a person goes down to a low spiritual or moral level, and he seems, he's excommunicated, he's out, he's terrible, right? Nevertheless, maybe he deserves it. Could be very well he deserves it. Nevertheless, don't give up on the person. There's always a possibility of teshubah, and one should always be helped and be redeemed if at all possible. Okay, beautiful derasha. So that's Abaye's answer. Even in the Torah itself, that a person is bad and doesn't do teshuvah and goes down to the lowest level, even then you should redeem him, and that's where I learned it from. You treat him nicely and give him food and drink to the same level that you are. He shouldn't suffer while he's Eved Ivri. And yes, even though he sinned, you should try to redeem him. Now we ask one more question. Ve'ema geulati elo ki echid alali tama ben anochrim halinan pijom nachmir ale midrebi Yoseh b'rebi Chanina. Wait a second. All we learn from here, from the Torah, is that you should redeem him only because we don't want him to assimilate among the Gentiles. We got it, right? This is a problem. Sometimes when you push someone away and criticize them and, don't accept them, then they'll end up assimilating. And that's a danger of pushing people away too harshly. Right, as Gemara says, you should always push away with your left hand, but open the door and draw near with your right hand at the same time. So we understand that you should redeem him because we don't want him to be assimilated totally and get used to being in idolatry over there. But that doesn't mean that we have to pay, that we can pay less. The family has to redeem him, but maybe they should pay full price. The point of redeeming him is not because he's necessarily worthy of redemption, right? And we should be easy on him. It's just that we don't want him to be an idolater. So we'll redeem him. But it doesn't mean we should be easy on him. Maybe, in fact, we have to pay the full price. And if his price went up, then we'll make the relatives pay more. And so we didn't fully answer the question, and therefore we have a second answer. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Tereh kera'eh ketibe, ketib im od rabot bashanim, uchtiv im me'at nishar bashanim, v'chi yesh shanim merubot, v'yesh shanim me'otot. Look in the pasuk, it says, if there are many years or if there are few years. You see, Ge'ula Mikesab Miktato appears in this context of Od Rabot, and Kefi Shanav appears in the context of Im Me'at. Now, what does this mean? Is there such a thing as big years and small years? All years are the same. Actually, some years, we have an extra month and so on, right? But basically, all years are the same. It's not like there's long and short years. So what does this mean? Ela nitraba kaspo mikesab miktato nitbet kaspo kefi shanav. Rather, it means if he became more expensive over the years, then you pay the original sale price. If he became cheaper over the years, that's me'at bashanim, then you pay the current price. Okay, pretty good answer. You have to look in the context. Further clarification, ve'ema hachika amar hechad avad tereh ufash le'arba netib le'arba mikesab miknato avad arba ufashu le'tarte netib tarte kefi shanav. Wait a second, I can explain this pasuk more simply. Maybe it means where he served for 2 years and now he still has to do 4 more years of service, right? So there's many years left. So then you give the money of redemption. Whereas if he served 4 years and there's only 2 years left, that's a few. So then you have to give less, right, according to his years. So maybe I know there's not big years and small years, but maybe we're talking about how many years he has served and how many years are left. So we answer, im ken nichtov kera im od rabot shanim, im me'at nishar shanim. In that case, it wouldn't have to say the bet, right? It could have just said, if there are many years, if there are few years left. So what's my bashanim, right? In the years. Nitraba kaspo bashanim mikesab miknato. Nitmet kaspo bashanim kefi shanav. So it means if his price got bigger during the years, right? That's in the years, then you pay the original price. And if his price got less in those years, during those years, then you pay according to the current price that happened after those years. And so that's his answer. You just look at the context to explain why we apply the original price when that's cheaper, and the current price when that is cheaper. Amar Rav Yosef Darshinhu, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Lahane Kira'eh Kisinai. Rav Yosef reflected about what Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak just said, and he says he interprets them as they were in their pristine presentation back at Har Sinai. In other words, he got right to the original truth and meaning of these Pesukim. Now we begin a new question. We start with the mnemonic Siman Ha'eved Bait Chatzain Bait Eved Kerubim. A mnemonic for the following cases. Be'amine Rav Huna Bar Chinena Merav Sheshat. Eved Ivri Nimkar Lenochri Nigal Lachasain or Eno Nigal Lachasain. The question is, if an Eved Ivri is sold to a non-Jew, he can certainly be redeemed for his full price at any point. Let's say he was worth 100 at the beginning and he's being redeemed in the middle, so you redeem him for 50. The question here is, can he be redeemed for a partial value? In other words, let's say right at the beginning, he's sold, and then the relatives hear about it, they rush over, and they it's for 600 for 6 years, and they say, well, we don't have 600, but we have 300, so we'll pay you the 300 now, and that way he'll only have to work for 3 years, right? So that will be a partial redemption. Is that permissible or not? Here are the two sides of the question. On the one hand, geulato misedeh achuzah gamar, masedeh achuzah eno nigal lachasain, af hainameh eno nigal lachasain. On the one hand, you have the same word, geulato, regarding ancestral land and regarding an Eved Ivri who is sold to a non-Jew. Just like over there, you cannot redeem partial. We learn this from the pasuk here. Umasa kedei geulato. If he acquires enough money to redeem. So that means when you want to redeem land, you have to get enough money on hand, cash, to redeem the whole thing at once. Otherwise, you can't just give a down payment for the redemption. I'll redeem half of it. So, and therefore that will be the same law here if we make this Gezer HaShava. Or maybe we reject the Gezer HaShava and we say, yes, you can redeem half. And if you can redeem half, we just said earlier that you always do it likula for the benefit of the slave to help him go free. We'll see in a minute how you can have a case of kula and humra with a fluctuating price, and if you redeem half at a certain time and it goes up, or you redeem half at a certain time and then it goes down. But the point is that you can redeem for half, and it would always be for the benefit of redemption. So what's the answer? Amar le lav amar tatam nimkar kulo velo chesyo achiname nigal kulo velo chesyo. He says, in fact, yes, we do compare them. And just like regarding ancestral land, you have to redeem all at once. So to here, all at once, and you can't do a partial redemption. Amar Abaye, im timse lomar nigal chasain, mashkach hada lekula ulechomra. Abaye elaborates on the original question and said, if we would have concluded that you can redeem a slave partially, you could have a case where it would be for leniency, for the benefit of the slave, or for stringency, which would be for the benefit of the master. How so? Lekula. Ala zabene b'me'a yahab lehamshin. Palga de dameh ve'ashbach ve'kam al matan. Let's say the original sale price was for 100. And then some short time later, it turned out, so it was 100. And then the family member gave 50. That's all I have right now. I want to redeem half of him, and then that way he'll work for half the time. That's half of the price. And then some short time later, let's say, he became more valuable, and now he's worth 200. So he already paid half. So now, what if he wants to finish the redemption? Let's assume that no time passed in between that, in terms of working. We'll just assume that this happened like over the course of a day. If you say the first half was already done, so he already redeemed the first half for the original 50, and now he became worth 200, so he only has to do half of the remaining, so that would be an extra, an added 100, and he totally goes free. However, if you don't say that you can redeem someone for half, well, then that means that he has to pay full. So he paid 50 beforehand, but he still has to get to 200 in total. That's how much he's worth. So you gave a down payment of 50, but that didn't count for anything. So now you have to pay the remaining 250 to make 200 altogether, and so that would be to the benefit. Here, if you were allow selling for half, it would be for the benefit of the redeemer. Now, v'ha'amart nitraba kaspo mikesef miknato kegon deokir ve'okir. Hold on, we said above that whenever you figure out a sale price and the price goes up, you could go back to the original sale price. So when he's redeeming at this point later on, why can't he just go to the original sale price and give 100? He was worth 100 to begin with. So all he should have to pay is, the remainder. He should never have to pay more than 100. So he explained, no, we're talking about a case where he was worth 200 at their sale price. He went down to 100, and that's when he redeemed half of him for 50. And then he went back up. So if you go by the original sale price, it'll be 200. But if you say half of him was redeemed already, even though he paid only 50, but that counts for half, and then there's only 100 left. So that's how we can explain it together with the law before. So that's the example of leniency. So the original sale price was 200. The relative came and said, I can pay 100 now to redeem half of him. Some short time later, he went down in price, and now he's only worth 100 altogether. If you say that original 100 was good for half of it, but now he has to deal with the other half, so he gives another 50, because that's the other half. That's what the other half is worth now. So that's 150 altogether. However, if you say you cannot, then that 100 that he gave beforehand was a down payment for the future. It didn't buy anything. And so therefore, right now, he's only worth 100 altogether. So he could just say, hey, that 100 that I gave you, you were holding on to me onto it for me as a deposit. So now just keep it. And now he goes totally free. And that would be for the benefit of the owner. So in this case, if you apply nigal chatzain, that would be for stringency for the redeemer. So that explains the two sides of when we would apply it and when not. If we did apply it at all. So next question, if someone sells a land in a walled city, the law of a house in a walled city is the owner has only 1 year to redeem it. Otherwise, that's it. He cannot redeem it anymore. He doesn't even get it back in the year of the Yovel. Can he redeem half of it or not? So we answer, Geulato, Misedeh Achuza Gamad. Masedeh Achuza na Negelet Chasayin, Afai Name, Eno Negala Chasayin. On the one hand, you could answer that. We make a Gezerah Shava, and just like ancestral land, you have to have the whole thing and not half. So too here, with the house, you have to redeem the whole land at once. Or should we not make such a gezerah shava and say when the Torah revealed the law and said kedei geulato regarding a field, then it revealed that you have to have it all at once. And where it didn't say anything with land, with the house, so then it didn't say anything, so therefore it's permitted. That's the two sides. Amar le Midrashot Rabbi Shimon Nishma Shelove Vegoel Hasain. So Rav Sheshat answered from the following Midrash. I will learn that yes, in fact, you can. We're going to learn two things. In fact, that you can borrow money. The original owner of the house can borrow money and redeem it. See, you can't do that for land. The law for land is that if you want to redeem your land, you have to have cash on hand, new money. That you brought in and a full amount. But not so for a house. You can borrow money to redeem the house and you can redeem half of it. But the Tanya, Im Gaol Yigal Melamed Shelove Vegoel Lachasain. The double language, Gaol Yigal, teaches that for a house in a walled city, you can borrow money to redeem it, and you can redeem it halfway. So that's a good answer. Amar Rabbi Shimon, Ma ta'am? לפי שמעשינו במוכר שדה אחוזה שאיפה כוחו, שאם הגיע יובל ולא נגאלה, חוזרת לבעליה ביובל, הוא רק כוחו שאין לווה וגואל לחסאין. Rabbi Shimon, in general, he says that you can explain the meaning of Pesukim, you can understand their reason, and based on that reason, you can then extrapolate other things from it. So Rabbi Shimon explains what's the reason for this law? Because we find regarding someone who sells a field that person has an enhanced power. What's the enhanced power? When the Yovel comes and he didn't redeem it, it goes back to the original owner, right? So the original owner who sold the ancestral land will get it back no matter what in the Yovel. So since he has that extra power, so he has to counterbalance that diminished power in that he cannot borrow or to redeem it, and he cannot redeem it for half. Right? That's the balance of powers here. Makdish shehura kocho shemigia yovel velo nigala yosal kohanim bayovel yipa kocho shelove vegoel lachasain. On the other hand, yet another case of someone who consecrates a field to the Bet HaMikdash. So then it goes to the Kohanim. So that person has diminished power, because when the Yovel comes and he didn't redeem it, he loses it. He has a right to redeem it before the Yovel. But if he doesn't, and the Yovel comes, then, and the Kohanim in the meantime sold it to someone else, it goes back to the Kohanim. So that's a diminished power. So to counterbalance that, if someone consecrates their land, he can borrow to redeem it, and he can borrow it halfway. Okay, so now that we know that, we can apply the same logic to the house. Hay mocher bait bebate are choma nameh. הואיל והוא רק כוחו שימלאה לו שנה תמימה ולא נגאלה נחלט, ייפה כוחו שלווה וגואל החסאין. Someone who sold a house is more similar to someone who consecrates a field, because he has a limited power in that if he has only 1 year to redeem it, and if he doesn't redeem it in 1 year, that's it. It remains permanently in the hands of the buyer. Yovel, we will not get it back. So since that power is limited, so to counterbalance that, he has more power to redeem it with borrowed money or to redeem it halfway. So this is the logic to explain why the house would be similar to consecration and would be different from selling ancestral land. Challenge to this from the following baraita. Itibe im gaol yigal melamed shelove vegoel lachasain. If a person wants to redeem a field that he consecrated, the context of this pasuk is consecration. The double language teaches that you can borrow money and redeem it, and you can redeem it halfway. So now this baraita is going to ask, wait, why do we need a pasuk? We can apply a following kal vachomer, sheyachol ve'alo dinhu. Now this kal vachomer is going to be an opposite logic than what we just saw in the name of Rabbi Shimon. Here we say, ומה מוכר שדה אחוזה שיפה כוחו שמגיע יובל ולא נגאלה חוזרת לבעליה ביובל, הוא רק כוחו שאין לו וגואל החסאין. So if, when you sell an ancestral land, your power is greater because even if you don't do anything, you'll get it back in the Yovel. And yet, he has less power in that he cannot borrow money and redeem it or redeem it halfway. מקדיש שהורק כוחו שמגיע יובל ולא נגאלה יוסר לכהנים ביובל, אינו דין שהורק כוחו שאין לווה וגואל לחסאין. So someone who consecrates, who has less power to begin with, because Yovel doesn't get it back to him, all the more so, he'll have less power than someone who sells an ancestral land and cannot borrow to redeem it and cannot redeem it partially. So that's what logic would have said. That's why you need the pasuk v'im gaol yigal to say, for a consecration, you can use borrowed money and redeem it partially. So now we say, wait a second, but this kal vachomer is not good. Lemocher sedeh achuza sheken hu ra kocho ligael miyad toba b'makdish sheyipa kocho ligael miyad, because the sedeh achuza, ancestral land, is different because he has a limitation. And that someone who sells ancestral land cannot redeem it right away. He has to wait 2 years. And so that's a limitation on that. And maybe that's why it comes along with a limitation on borrowed money or partial. But Makdish, someone who consecrates his land, can redeem it immediately. So since he can redeem it immediately, maybe I would know just but logically that it would be fine for him to use borrowed money, or to do it partially. So I wouldn't need that derasha after all. But then we say, no, in fact, the kal vachomer is good, because look, mocher bayit bebate arecho ma yochiach sheyipa kocho ligael miyad ve'en loveh ve'goel lachasain. Someone who sells land in a walled city where he has greater power because he also can redeem it immediately, and yet he cannot use borrowed money and cannot partially redeem it. The point here is that the fact that one can or cannot redeem it immediately does not make an effect on the ability to use borrowed money and partially redeem it. And so at the end of the Braita, the kal vachomer is good, and that's why we need the derasha. This is a problem for us because this Baraita comes to the opposite conclusion, because it says that a house cannot, to redeem a house, you cannot you cannot use borrowed money, and you cannot do it partially. So how can we resolve it? The answer is la kashya, hada banan, hada bi Shimon. There's no problem here because the second baraita is the opinion of Rabbanan, and they use the logic that we just said. They'll apply this kal vachomer logic, and their opinion, a house in a walled city cannot be partially redeemed, and you cannot use borrowed money. But the first baraita was the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and he is doresh ta'amad dikra. He explains the balance of powers logic, and so in his opinion, it makes sense to say that a house can be redeemed partially or with borrowed money. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.